Welcome to today's event. I'm Gemma Monk-Hartley from Herefordshire Green Network's Building Sense Group, an initiative that started in 2020 to bring together people, information and professional expertise to help with the challenge of making homes comfortable year-round in the face of high heating bills and cutting carbon emissions. Since 2022, we've been partnering with local charity March's Energy Agency on Future Ready Homes, a programme that promotes and supports good practice retrofit of homes across the March's area, which is Shropshire, Telford and Wrekin and Herefordshire. It's doing this through a webinar series, which is why we're here today, retrofit advice and events like Green Open Homes, which is coming up in just a few weeks' time. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that later. So I'll introduce our webinar and speaker now. Today, we are lucky enough to have energy expert and data modeler Duncan Sluce, Director of Data, Energy and Climate Change Consultancy, DEC. Thank you, Duncan. He's here to talk to us about green tech retrofit, how to select technology that will decarbonise your home and significantly lower your energy bills. Thank you, Duncan, for coming along. Yeah, really looking forward to this presentation. So let's hand over to you.
You've built me up brilliantly. Welcome, everybody. You've built me up brilliantly. I'll better live up to this now. Hi. My name's Duncan Sluce. So I'm going to, as Gemma says, I'm an energy modeler. I've got a lot of experience in the industry. I've been in the industry for about 25 years. We're going to look through a presentation which I'm going to share my screen with now, and we'll start with that.
Yeah, that's sharing.
That's good. Something else has moved around, so you just need to bear with me 1 second. Right. Hi, my name's Duncan Sluce. Today we're looking at exploring what can be done to reduce carbon emissions and energy bills from houses using low carbon technologies. My company's DEC, which does energy modelling and energy forecasting, especially with respect to net zero and domestic energy. DEC's a very small company. It's myself and my wife. I'm an experienced energy analyst working in the industry for over 25 years. I spent 20 years in National Grid, and then I left 6 years ago to set up this company. So today, first, an apology from me. One, I've got everything in the middle of my slide, so I need to just move that. So bear with me. Apologies for me for two reasons for this. Some of these slides aren't quite as well developed as I would like, because I've got a lot on. I'm busy like lots of other people, so I've just tried to squeeze this in as well as we can. The second is a bit more pertinent. This has taken a bit more time to develop than I thought, because it can be quite complicated, and it's involved, and changing one or two more variables can change this quite a bit, and can change some of the messaging. So I can understand how you might feel daunted by this due to all the information, but there's not always a definite path. So today there's some key messages and themes that come out from this work, and some context that's important to keep in mind, which should help clarify your thinking and simplify things. I'll highlight these, and hopefully this should give you a better understanding and help you feel more confident in any decisions that you want to make or any progress that you want to do in this area. So what the contents that we're going through today is we're examining energy demand for typical UK houses to give you a context, to give you an idea of the starting point. Then we're looking at what can be done to reduce carbon emissions and energy bills from these houses using low carbon technologies. And we're going to explore how these low carbon technologies can give you the best return on your investment, and also the best carbon savings. We're investigating the optimal PV and battery sizing options for an average house, but this is kind of applicable to most houses, and I'll explain that in a bit. We're exploring the impact that variable tariffs can have on energy bills when using low carbon technologies as well. Then we're looking at exploring options to change heat via heat pumps, because there's a couple of potential options here. Also looking at some main practical considerations when retrofitting a house with low carbon technologies, and we're going to use some of my personal experiences to help that, so hopefully you'll find that quite useful. There's some slight oddities with some of that don't always get thought about. Hopefully that's quite engaging. The technologies that we're focusing on are solar PV, domestic batteries. We're going to have a little look at a solar hot water water diverter as well, and then looking at heat pumps. Also, I'm going to look a little into understanding what options may be most suitable for older homes. So some points to note is the prices are the latest available prices for quarter 2024, both for energy and also our best assessment of costs for low carbon technologies. The optimum tech sizing changes for each house, user and tariff, but there are some general themes that occur. All demands are based on average demands for patterns of usage, and individual houses will vary. And we're not assessing do not assess the impacts of changing demand patterns as a result of retrofit, which can have a large benefit. So in practice, you'll find that if you do retrofit your house with solar or something like that, you tend to use stuff when the sun's out, for example, and that's not in there. So and in practice, what you probably find is slightly greater benefits than the actual outputs that are modeled here, especially if you move to variable tariffs, such as moving behaviors of energy uses when prices are lowest or when it's sunniest. Tariffs have a large impact, especially the export price for excess solar. We'll touch on that in a bit. You might need an EV or a plug-in hybrid for some of the best available tariffs. So it's just something to bear in mind. And the other thing is energy prices, tariffs will all change and no one knows how. We also always recommend reducing your energy demand via efficiency, but we're not focusing on this here. The focus of today is looking at these low carbon technologies. But we'll touch this on during the presentation, but not at a high, but only at a high level. So, looking at the energy demand for typical housing, this slide's here to provide a starting point to understand the demand patterns of UK houses and give you some context. The graphs here are looking at 3 typical houses. They are based on demand categories from the gas industry for heat, and also the electricities from Ofgem's average house demands for electricity, which are published, which is 2,900 kilowatt hours a year, by the way. The houses that we're looking at are, from the left chart, is an average old house from around about 1900s, a semi-detached, then similar aged house, and that's oil heated, and then we have a similar aged house that's gas heated, and then we have a more modern house, a house built around about 1980s, semi-detached gas heating as well. The graphs are showing the energy going into a house to supply its demand. It's key for me to explain this now because you'll see the same different iterations of this chart throughout. So we're looking at the energy going into a house to supply its demand. Gas is blue, electricity from the grid is light grey, oil is dark grey, and each chart goes from the 1st of January on the left-hand side daily throughout the year up until the 31st of December on the right. And you'll see that the gas and oil are higher in the winter periods that's when we use our heating. And the other thing to bear in mind was the black squiggly line that's on there is the carbon. It's a combination, and it's a combination of the emissions for gas or oil for heating, and also what the grid electricity price is at that particular time. And the electricity price is based upon the average grid emissions in 2023 for the grid. And it's done on a half-hourly basis. All of the modelling here is done on a half-hourly basis, and then the results you see are on a daily basis, and then we aggregate them for the years. What you'll see looking at these charts is for the house type and age. The house type and the age have a large impact on heat demand and therefore gas or oil demand. But for electricity demand, it's mainly based on occupancy. We've got the same occupancy of these houses. So for these houses, the only change is actually gas and oil demand, and that has a bit of a bearing on some of the stuff that we look at initially for solar PV and battery, because we're assuming the same sorts of whatever house you're in. It's more about occupancy that tends to impact your electricity demand. So yeah, and some things to look about are there is about 4 times more gas compared to electricity demand, and a little bit more oil. But the electricity price, there's about 4 times more gas, but the gas price is around about a quarter that of electricity. So there's a lot more energy in the gas, but you pay about the same amount for both, for gas and for electricity, and it's a little bit more expensive still for oil. However, the carbon associated with the gas and oil and heating is much more. The energy is involved much more, and the carbon is much more. So you can get and you'll find we'll show that you can get quite a lot of financial saving from electricity, but the carbon savings for our electricity are limited because the stuff that you really need to tackle is reducing your gas or oil uses to make major changes to your carbon emissions. So we're going to look at a gas house for future slides, a modern gas house for future slides, as the retrofit we're investigating is initially just for electricity demand, which is the same for these houses. So the outputs will be relevant to any type of housing types until we electrify heat. Once we start looking at electrifying heat, we'll look at different types and see how they vary. So that was the starting point. We're now starting to add some what we're doing here is just starting to add some low carbon technologies and assessing their impact. And this is going to build up as we go along. So we'll start simply. And we've started with simple solar PV installation. And then we'll start adding more low carbon technologies. So what we've added here is a 3.6 kilowatt peak amount of solar. So at the most, when the sun's going its most, it will generate 3.6 kilowatts. The oil and the gas heated houses are the same benefits as we're only impacting electricity. So the percentage carbon and bill saving are a little bit different because oil has a higher starting point for carbon emissions. So what's happening here is this is the same as the previous slide, but we've added an extra bit down the bottom, which is yellow, which is this bit in yellow is the solar that gets generated and then gets used while it's generated. And then also the orange is solar that's generated but isn't being used, so it gets exported to the grid. And you'll get paid for a reasonable amount for what you get exported. Both of these contribute to the financial picture, which is in the chart here. So what we're seeing is basically an annual saving of 200 kilograms of carbon emissions, which is either 8 or 5% of a house, comparing if you're looking at gas or oil. And then which is in financial terms, it's just under £400. And the payback for this is about 11 years. So the cost that we've got for this solar installation is about £4,500, just under £4,500. Some of the learnings from this, some of the points to note is that larger solar is generally more cost effective because a large part of the cost of the installation, which doesn't is the installation which doesn't increase linearly. So if you have something that's 2 kilowatts compared to something that's 4 kilowatts, the 4 kilowatt one is going to be less than twice the price of the 2 kilowatts. However, there's also a balance between how much PV you use and how much you want to export, or and how much you export, and there's a reasonable optimum there. The maximum size of the solar that you're allowed to put in your house is limited by the electricity network that you're connected to. We've put 3.6 here in because that's the limit of what you're allowed to put in without having to ask permission. If you go above 3.6, you have to ask permission. And my local network, which is National Grid, which used to be Western Power Distribution, and should affect most of the people in the March Energy area as well, should be the same. They say that you can't connect, says if you connect anything bigger than 3.6, it can't be bigger than 5, but if it is bigger than 5 kilowatts peak, you must limit it to 5 kilowatts. So an approach that you can do is you can actually have a larger solar system, but you limit it with inverter. So for example, in my house, I've actually got 8 kilowatt peak, but I've got a 5 kilowatt inverter. So only a maximum of 5 kilowatts can get generated. And I find that quite valuable because you get more generated in less sunny conditions, such as winter months, which is very valuable because this is when it gets used. It's also most valuable to use as much of your self-generation as possible. Anything you export, the orange category, you get a price for, and it's normally called the SMEG, the Smart Export Guarantee. And in this modelling, it's 5p, which is a standard you would expect. But you can get higher exports, such as on Octopus tariffs. There are some higher exports, but they require electric vehicles. But the annual saving, if you have the higher export price, will increase to about £624, which is a 37% saving for a gas heated house, and a payback that will reduce the payback to 7 years. So if you get a higher export price, you get a quicker payback. And in this case, what we're finding as well with just solar, if you start to go much above 3.6, the payback decreases, but it doesn't change much, because basically a lot of the extra you get, you're actually exporting, so you're not using. So what you want to do, really, once you start getting bigger, you start exporting a lot more in this case. So one of the things to do is, for this case, a battery would be helpful. So let's have a look at the battery. If you add a battery, you impact more of your carbon savings and payback, because the battery shortens payback because it enables more self-use, more of what you generate, you use. And also it gives you the ability to take advantage of variable tariffs as well. So you reduce you charge your battery at lower price electricity. The carbon reduction is greater than just PV in isolation because there's less grid electricity used. Most electricity is directly from solar or charged from solar. So in this case, we've added a 5 kilowatt battery to that 3.6 kilowatt system. The orange is reduced, and the thing that's added to this chart is this green area. And the green area is the solar that gets generated, that gets put into the battery, and then you use from the battery a little bit later. And the end result is there's a much less grey than there was before. If I flick back to the previous slide, you'll see there was a lot of grey here, and now that has actually reduced considerably. So around 2/3 of your electricity is now being generated from solar. Generally, a larger battery works better with large solar, and it's best to go quite big with both or quite small with both. Tends to be the output of that. So really, you're talking, if you have 3.6 kilowatts of solar, something like a 5 kilowatt battery would be good. But if you have something like 5 or 8 kilowatts of solar, it tends to work out a little bit better to get something like a 10 kilowatt hour battery. And in this case, it's shortened. In this case, it shortened the payback from the previous 11 years by about half a year, but the annual savings increased quite a lot. Cost has gone up initially because of the battery, the extra cost of the battery, but your annual savings is getting better. And one of the points that Gemma wanted to make earlier as well is these are paybacks and they take a bit of time. But once you get past that, you're always making a saving. Once you get past that point, you will continue to see these benefits. So it's a good thing to think about. The other point to make is this again is with the lower export guarantee price, but if you have the higher export guarantee price, it decreases by just over 2 years. It reduces to 8.4 years of payback. So with all of this, though, your carbon saving is limited by the fact that you've not gone into your gas demand. So let's look at trying to impact the gas demand. This is where you start to make some big savings in carbon. But one simple solution before we start talking about heat pumps is to use a solar water diverter for houses that have a hot water tank. I'm not actually sure if I'm on camera or not at the moment, but if I am showing you, this is my solar water diverter. It is a box, not very big, and it just goes in next to the hot water tank. And what it does is it charges your hot water when it sees that you're exporting electricity. And in this case, the hot water demand by solar is shown in purple on this chart, and you'll see that the orange has reduced considerably. So the diverter has a limited impact on energy costs. In this case, it actually only saves you £15 per year, and that increases the payback a little. But it makes a really big dent in your carbon. The carbon's increased considerably from what was 14%. Now it's gone up to 22% reduction in your savings because you're impacting your gas. You're offsetting some of your gas demand. It's got limited cost impact because the prices are similar for hot water heating from a boiler compared with the money that you get for exports that no longer happen. If that sounds confusing, it still confuses me trying to work exactly out why that happens. But basically, it's not brilliant for value, for pure value, but it really does get you a lot more carbon offset. And in this case, solar produces around about half the hot water demand across the year. If you had larger solar, it would reduce it more. But that's only an option for houses that got hot water tanks. So that's only around about a third of our houses. So it could be an option for you, but let's look a little bit further. So to really make a big difference, you need to remove gas or oil for heating, or at least drastically reduce this. To do this, the most recognised option is a heat pump for heating. A heat pump generally takes heat from a source and moves it to another place. I actually say it steals it from one place to another. But basically, it's not generating heat, it's just moving it. And because of this, it's actually very efficient at heating, and they typically run between 300 and 4%, 100% efficiency. So if you put 1 unit of energy in, you'll get 3 to 4 units of heat out. So they're very efficient. And there are a few types. Air to air is the most simple, normally referred to as air conditioning. It supplies hot air to an area. It gets heat from outside and fires it in as hot, and then you can turn it around and make it cooler as well if you wanted the cold. Ground to water heat pumps heat your central heating system, supplying heat via your radiators, the same way your boiler does now. Well, they work differently, but they spread the heat around your house in the same way. They're connected to that same system. There is a large government incentive to help ground or air to water heat pumps, and it's called the Boiler Upgrade Scheme. It's currently available until 2027, 2028. The government's committed a large amount of money to it. I think the budget will fund 200,000 heat pumps, so up to that much. And the government scheme gives you £7,500 to replace your boiler with an air source heat pump or ground source heat pump for your central heating. It's applicable only to replacement of a full heating system. You must remove your boiler. All the following calculations that we've done here assume for a heat pump as a main heating system, assume you've received the £7,500 grant. If not, the cost and the payback becomes quite a lot higher. They cost more than boilers because you generally need more kit, including a buffer tank and a heavily insulated hot water tank. You might need other subsequential upgrades as well, such as radiator upgrades, or you may need to insulate your house further, especially with older houses or houses with solid walls. The costs in the modelling assume that the hot water and buffer tanks, the main stuff that's needed for it, are there, but it doesn't assume any subsequential upgrades are required. So just bear that in mind a little. Some companies are also trying to use the bus incentive to match the cost of a boiler replacement. This can have a really big impact. This is where it will really help drive it. In some cases, and have a really big impact on costs and make it much more financially viable in a lot of cases. In some cases, they'll match it, and in others, they won't. So, for example, for my house, I got a quote for £14,500 for the heat pump via one of these companies. So with the £7,500 incentive, that means I'd have to pay £7,000 still. Whereas my house is a detached 4-bedroom 1980s house. So whereas one of my friends has got a 1950s semi, a 3-bedroom 1950s semi, and they quoted him the same as the boiler replacement cost. So it actually is only going to cost him £2,500. So it wasn't financially viable for me in my case, but for him it was. So he's going ahead with this. The other type of heat pump is an air to air, often referred to as air conditioning. It's less expensive and more efficient because it's simpler. But they're not eligible for the boiler upgrade scheme, and it just heats the room. So, but you can oversize for a room to heat wider areas if you want, but it isn't a central heating system. So, it may be a potential opportunity for you, a possibility, but it can be used to offset considerable amounts of heating, then just using the central heating when needed. And air to air has obviously got air conditioning has the ability to cool as well, which the air to water systems and the stuff you get via bus haven't. You can't run cold water through the air through your radiators to cool your house down. It will just get condensation. It's not a thing that can be done. So let's have a bit of a look at what impact this has. So what's the impact installing a heat pump can have? The slide is showing the impact of an air source heat pump replacing a central heating as well as PV and batteries in a modern 1980s house. We'll have a look at another one in a moment. And there's two main points. You've drastically removed your emissions. If we look at the carbon saving bit in the chart, it's an 80% reduction. But you have also slightly increased your payback. What we're seeing in the graph, if we look at the graph, what's happening here is there is more solar being used. There is more solar being generated and used, and there's more being used in and around the battery as well, because you're using it for heating. Your electricity demand has gone up. The remaining electricity has increased as well, but obviously there is no gas at all. But also the thing to point out from this to the chart, a couple of charts here, which I'm going to flick back to, is how much this has reduced. And that's because of the efficiency of the heat pump. So your actual energy usage in your house has reduced considerably. As I said before, the cost of a heat pump assumes the heavy incentive, the £7,500 has been paid for with bus. Without that, the payback would be much longer. And note, this is for a modern house. For an older house, heating with a heat pump may be more difficult, and this may also require some insulation of the gut rays before installation. But let's assume that they are not, and let's redo that with this. So, and any other points to cover on this chart before I move over? Yeah, the other bit is generally it increases payback compared to PV and battery. The main variables that would affect this though are the export price of the if we had a high smart export guarantee price as well, this would reduce payback to 12.2 years in this period. The efficiency of the heat pump system can make quite a difference. So we've assumed it's 325% efficient at the moment. If it were between 300 and 400, that would change it to 14.8 or 12.7 compared to this 14.4. So a slightly more efficient system helps as well. Yeah, what cost you get the heat pump for has a big impact. And in this situation, we found out without the boiler upgrade scheme, the payback would increase by 6 years. But as I'm saying, if you're considering this now, it is available to you. So there is no reason that you wouldn't get that. So we're now looking at one of the older houses shown. So this is looking at the two larger houses, the two 1900s semis. Now the output for both of them was the same, it's just your starting point was different. So the chart is the same for both. And the difference is the house has got a larger heat demand, so this area has increased. As a result as well, to get a better saving, we've put a little bit, we've got slightly bigger technology in this. So we've got a 5 kilowatt peak solar PV. We've got 10 kilowatt hours of solar instead of the 5 that was used before. Again, this is running as well off a variable tariff, which is what we've been doing for most of these throughout. And it's an export guarantee price of the standard one, the 5, the lower price. We'll notice looking at both of these houses, the carbon saving is very large in both of these houses. We're talking a little bit over, a little bit under 80%. The annual saving in price is considerable as well. The saving compared to oil is quicker, and any price and payback, because the oil price is generally a little bit more expensive. I know it varies considerably, but yeah, generally a little more expensive. It makes it a little bit more attractive when you're replacing the oil. But the payback has got a little bit longer for larger houses because the kit needs to be a bit bigger. And we're not assuming any other retrofit insulation or other measures which may not be included in these houses. And those may be required, which may make it less financially attractive. So that's an important thing to consider. And for that, you really would need to get an assessor to come in, have a look at your house to say how suitable your house is for a heat pump. So we're modeling standard houses here, but all houses are different. And when you start looking at older houses, you really do need to get somebody in to say what is required and what's necessary and go from there. But this is trying to give you a good feel here. One other option for heating could be to do some of it and keep central heating and use your central heating a lot less. So what we're looking at here is looking at putting an aircon unit into a house. Now, the cost for these are much less than for central heating, than for heat pumps for central heating, because there's less kit. So for example, for my house, I had my £14,500 quote, which would have been 7 once I got the incentive, compared to installing 2 large air conditioning units, which was £4,500. So that's quite a large saving. But there are no incentives for aircon. The siting, is important for aircon as room heaters. So to heat the rest of the house or heat a large part of the house, the siting is important. The siting a single unit in a living room is potentially helpful, and that's what I'm doing in my house. I find that works quite well. They also give you the option maybe just to heat a room. So if you normally just heat a room in the evening, that may work very well for you. No, with all of this, the modelling is still being tested though. This is quite new stuff. There is new modelling around this. It's not something that the government's concentrating on much. There's a lot of uncertainty around this, but everything points to a potential saving of 60 to 80%, and this model saving shows 72% here. How you operate the aircon would have a large impact. Basically, it needs to be on. Instead of your central heating most of the time just being topped up with central heating when needed. So you need to run it that way to start realizing decent savings. But they potentially have more cost and carbon savings. And then, yeah, use it for your general heating. And the other point as well is to say that obviously you get cooling as a service as well, which is something that doesn't exist currently unless you've got these units. And also another point to note is that on the times where you do need cooling, it's almost always free, because it's almost when the sun's out and you're generating a lot of electricity, and actually you tend to still be exporting when you're running the air conditioning units because they don't use much electricity. We've not modelled cooling, and you may need, if you have more than my understanding, and this needs checking entirely because I've got various different views, but for a heat pump for one unit, you generally don't need planning permission. For 2 units, you would, and if you had like 2 air conditioning units, you may need planning permission. So understanding a little bit, if we look at what options may be suitable for older, possibly harder to heat homes, these are the main points. As you said before, this isn't the focus today, but there's just some points to consider. First, before the heating bit, you can still do a lot with electricity and have results similar to modern houses. There's similar sorts of results, and they're fairly decent paybacks for solar and batteries. To go further, houses may need upgrades to be suitable for heat pumps. So insulation may be required, radiator upgrades, and possibly other upgrades may be needed. Air-to-air heating could still be an option with less retrofit requirements, particularly if you choose to heat for specific rooms in the house. Drafts are a real problem. Check drafts and seal where you can. Air tightness can go a long way and have a big positive impact. Good windows and doors can go a long way, particularly in older houses. But often you can do a lot with DIY options at low cost, particularly looking for draft sealing. And one other thing to consider is one of my favorite words, bubble gaskets to replace failed window seals. They tend to degrade over time and they can be replaced quite easily and cheaply. Air tightness makes a big difference, and time and attention have more impact than money. This tends to take effort. But it is something you can do. And it's also interesting that the government tends not to focus on air tightness as much as you may think. I do a lot of work on demand forecasting for houses and what the government schemes are. And one of the reasons for this is you can measure how many solid walls you've insulated, how many cavity walls you've insulated, how much lofts you've topped up, because there's numbers for it. Whereas things like this is very individual. There isn't one unit of air tightness that you can add to a house. So it's worth having a look at, and it can make a really big difference to your house. It's made a very large difference in this house. It makes a big difference in old houses and new houses alike. So one of the things I said I would have a look at is what the optimal would be for a house, and this is the optimal for a standard 1980s house that's come out. And really, we have 7 kilowatt hours of PV, which has been limited to 5 kilowatts via the inverter, a 5 kilowatt hour battery. But the payback doesn't change much if the PV size changes. At pretty much between 3.6 and 8 kilowatts, it's a similar sort of payback. The difference here is you end up spending more money and getting greater savings. So it's how much money do you want to spend when you're looking at what's an optimum for your solar and your PV. And as well, it doesn't vary between house type, particularly occupancy is what really affects your and your behaviours are what affects your electricity demand. So and also as well, if you do start electrifying heating, the optimal battery and PV size does start to increase because you've increased your electricity load, so you'll be using much more of that. So you want to generate as much as possible. So for this example, we've got a payback of 10.5 years. Yet if you have this higher export price as well, that reduces to 8.4 years. So these are the sorts of times you're looking at. But you're looking at large annual savings, about £600 to £750 savings, which is quite considerable. So, so we have a quick look at the variable tariffs, the impact the variable tariffs can have on energy demand. I've touched upon that with the export. We're just looking at that here. A variable to non-variable tariff with PV and battery, a mixture with or without heating. The impact on carbon with your tariff is negligible. The impact on your bills going from variable to non-variable can be sort of £50 to £150 a year. And the impact on your payback then can be between 1.5 and 2 years. The export price has a larger impact, potential impact. So again, with PV and battery, the impact on your carbon again is negligible, but the impact on your bills can be £150 to £500 a year for having a higher export price. So SMEG is the thing, it stands for Smart Export Guarantee, that's the export price, has a large impact. You might need an EV to get the best tariffs. Apologies for some spelling errors there. You might need an EV to get the best energy tariffs, but any type of plug-in car will be okay for this. So you get something really old or something with a very small mileage. There are also other export guarantee prices available where you don't need that. So one I'm aware of is one from EDF. They're currently offering one which actually offers you 20 pence, but you have to get your solar and your battery installed by then. So, you know, and as we say, these tariffs may change. We don't know exactly how well tariffs may change. And there's also an extra potential return from shifting your demand from behavior resulting from variable tariffs and higher export prices. So everything we've modeled here is assuming a standard behavior pattern and that remains as it is. But actually you start to find that you can do a few extra things, and battery charging at night can save you another £100 under variable tariff. Hot water nighttime charging using your solar iBoost or just an immersion heater can add a savings of £100 a year as well, compared to not for houses that have got hot water tanks. And a large one here is as well EV charging. If you have got an EV, charging it at night compared to charging it in the daytime, the variable tariff can be like sort of £400 a year. It's that sort of price order you can get. So there are some things to bear in mind. So an example house and actual retrofit. This is my house. What I tend to do is build the model, put the stuff into the house, then test the model and see if the model's working, and then adjust the model accordingly. And that's what we've been doing. So my house is, as an example, it's a modern house, 1980s, 4-bedroom, attached house. I've got 8 kilowatts of PV limited with a 5 kilowatt inverter. That costs these prices just under £10,000. 10 kilowatt hour battery, which is £4,000. I've got 2 aircon units, so 2 6 kilowatt units. That's 12 kilowatts of heating in total. They cost £4,500. Interestingly enough, it's the same unit on the outside, but one of them has 2 units on the inside, splitting it. One heats this room here at the minute, and the other one's at the top of my landing, and then the other one's a big unit in the living room. They both add up to £4,500, but the single unit was £1,000 cheaper than the one with the split thing, because it was a slightly bigger, easier installation. It was less kit. So that's something to bear in mind. A bigger unit's a bit cheaper generally, a single unit. I have a solar hot water diverter, which was £800, and that's a total cost of just over £19,000. My bills before were £200 a month, and they're now £40 a month. I've got a variable tariff, and I've got the good export price guarantee. I've got 15 pence kilowatt hour export guarantee price as well. From this, it says 10.5 years payback. There's been some behavior changes as well since that. I think in reducing that, and I think this is more closer to 7 or 8 years from changing a lot of behaviors, particularly things like charging my aircon to do a little bit of base heating at night time, just to take the edge off. An annual saving, I start of just under 2 tons, and a starting point of 2.7 tons. So that's 70% saving, and it's nearly £2,000 saving a year as well. Really, there's a lot of money spent, but it's actually been really good. And on this, I suppose the bits that I find probably more interesting from some of this as well, from just the numbers, and we spoke about lots of numbers, is just some learning points. And apologies, there's a lot here, but there is a lot of learnings from putting your own stuff in. So, and there's a few slides of this. But how are we doing for time, gentlemen? Can I ask this question? Is that okay, people?
Yeah, no, you're fine.
We're okay. Okay, thank you. So here's some of the personal things. PV orientation, people talk about, you've got to have a south-facing roof. It's really important. Well, that generates the most electricity annually. A south-facing roof, 15 degrees off the horizontal, creates the most annually. But most of that then gets generated in the high sun, you end up exporting it. So it's not always the most valuable. I have an east and south. I have 2 arrays, east-facing panel and a south-facing panel. I wished I'd actually been able to put an east-facing and not have the south ones, but have a west-facing one instead. Because what that would have ended up doing is I get some really good electricity generated in the morning. I get good electricity generated throughout the day. But then that when it starts going into the evening, you really want to be able to top up your battery. And if I had some west facing, as the sun's starting to go down, I would have captured that, and that would work out better, even though I would get less electricity across the year. So something to bear in mind. Got to check shading, very important. And don't check the shading in the summer, check it in the winter as well, because it's really important in the winter. It's really useful to get that electricity in the winter, because you tend to find that you're using it, particularly if you've got some electric heating. So check that in the winter months as well. My solar hot water diverted only 1/3 of my hot water tank, because my immersion heater is only 1/3 of the length of the hot water tank. So I put a longer one in. And it's now about 2/3, so it generates a lot more hot water. So something to bear in mind, didn't cost much. One thing we found out, got a power cut, and I thought, brilliant, we've got batteries, and my electricity went off. I was like, what? I didn't think that was the case. They do not protect you from power cuts by default. The way that mine's been set up and the way my installer does it, they don't. I know my understanding is that's the situation generally. Please, you need to check this with an installer. However, I can have a little plug that I can put into my battery, which means that I basically have an extension lead that's always available if I want. They said there may be problems with earthing relating to that, so they didn't really recommend it. I've only had 2 power cuts. They've not been problematic, so I've not bothered personally. But if you're in an area that gets more power cuts, might be something to bear in mind. One negative is that I found out when in the winter, well, in the evenings, when I'm generating nothing, my inverter is taking power from my battery. It's a vampire load, and it takes somewhere between 50 and 150 watts across the evening. So that's something to bear in mind, particularly when you're working out what size battery you may want. So that's something to be considered. I find my solar's actually really quite decent. Even on a cloudy day, I'm generating 1 to 2 kilowatts at the moment. It's quite nice and sunny out a minute. I will be generating 5 kilowatts right now because the sun's come out, which is great. I often found that I had spare electricity in winter and spring. So that's when I decided to add an air conditioning unit to help heat up this room and a little part of my house. That worked so well. I added another one to heat up the living room, and it's looking like I'm barely using my central heating at all. I'll just test that over the coming months. But in this situation, and I'm very obsessed with this sort of stuff, I've managed to really reduce my central heating system. Aircon's not central heating, but it can be used almost as such if positioned and sized incorrectly. As I said, my small units, I have the one that's split to 2 small units, my office and my upstairs landing, my large units in the living room. The large units having the office works really well for me when I'm working in the cold. The large unit is starting to mean that I'm not needing to use my central heating anywhere near as much. The aircon, the aircon and other heat pumps are quiet. There are so many people saying about it being noisy, and that mine are really quiet. The other ones I've seen are really quiet. I understand as they get a bit older, they may get a little bit noisier, but they are very quiet at the moment. Genuinely, it's about as loud as, it's not even as loud as my voice. It's quite a lot quieter than that. My aircon is as efficient as claimed as well. It is 400% efficiency, and it's cheap to run, especially to heat this one particular room. Works very well, and it works very well if I just want to heat the living room in the evenings as well. My behaviour change under variable tariff with a high export guarantee. I have the high export guarantee. Have increased my bill savings by about another £500 a month. Above the modelled savings. So they're from appliance use, but also as well from battery saving, hot water charging at night, and EV charging, worth over £500 a year. The best variable tariffs are often EV related and require an EV, although plug-in would suffice for that. Any old EV would suffice for a really old Nissan Leaf would do it, and they're about £2,000 to £3,000. A lot of those, is my understanding. They don't go very far at all. Also, if you do have an EV, slightly off our main subject, but you don't need a dedicated charger installed. You can get a 3-pin charger for £100 to £200, which works very well actually, but it's just much less convenient. Battery ratings. I should know this, and then I forgot. And everyone can do all this sort of stuff, but battery ratings are their full ratings, but they tend to use, the batteries only tend to use about 80% of that rating, so that they keep their long life. Basically, they don't tend to go much below 20 or 25%. So the quotable battery for my 10 kilowatt hour battery is actually an 8 kilowatt hour, but is 8 kilowatt hours of usable. So that's something to bear in mind. Extra batteries can often just be added later and plugged in simply, but just double check the VAT implications. There used to be a VAT implication. My understanding is it's gone now. What you get is low or no VAT on a solar installation, and then if you're installing the other low carbon technologies at the same time, you don't have to pay VAT. However, if you then install something subsequently, you may have to. That used to be the case with batteries. That has now gone, I believe. But just check these implications as well. So it's good to do that all at the same time. There are many unknowns. One of my main unknowns was that I got my battery, and then my son would decide to cook a pizza in the main oven at 11 o'clock at night most nights, therefore draining half of my battery and reducing a lot of my benefits. So I ended up getting another battery as a result. So just something that was one of our own particular end uses. And the battery position is important. In a cold place such as a garage, in cold winter, cold weather protection will heavily limit the battery charge and discharge capabilities until it warms up. To resolve this, I ended up wrapping mine into an insulation, and also have a very small, very low powered propagator on one side as well if I need to warm the battery. And that worked well, but then what I found in now is I actually charge it a little bit at night, and the very slight inefficiencies of the battery just get enough to get it warmed up at night, so it isn't a problem, but when it's got the insulation on. But there's something to bear in mind. I actually had a fan heater running on off excess electricity, because I was losing electricity at one point, which worked, which was a bit crazy. Once low carbon technology is in place, users tend to vary demand patterns. And as I've discussed, and we've done that, and being very conscientious of how much energy was in my battery as well, made me also just buy a larger air fryer for my son, which is already paid for itself, much better than turning the oven on. I just thought it was an unusual thing. And also my behaviours change as well, particularly the heat timings. I run more consistently heating timings when the sun's out, but the heating on quite often. And also I run the air conditioning units at night time for a bit of a low power backup as well, which works well. It's very easy to schedule these. There's an app, like everything it's got. You can just say, I want to run from there to there at this temperature. And I just leave it like that, because in the summer it won't get below that temperature. So it's fine. It runs perfectly fine. It's very easy to turn that on and off. They were the main concluding point. They were the main points from my experiences. And really, to conclude, variable tariffs can have a large impact, but that difference gets much bigger when you have much more and larger low carbon technologies. The export by guarantee price has got a huge bearing, and the best export guarantees price may require you to have an EV. You can get great payback and carbon reductions from electricity, PV, and batteries. But to largely decarbonise your house, you need to reduce your gas heating. Heat pumps are the only options really to do this are the main option to do this, or the main option cited to do this, and they can potentially be used as well as a boiler if you wanted to supplement your heating. They can be run cheaply using some low price electricity from variable tariffs, or for free from solar. Tariffs can have a high impact on payback, and the exports can be a large part of this. And once retrofitting with low carbon technology, you should find your behavior is likely to change as it impacts your bills significantly. And the other bit just to stress is air tightness can go a really long way, particularly in older houses, to help you be able to decarbonise your heating. But it's just a good idea anyway. It just takes a little bit of time. And I found myself crawling around near doors, frames and things like that, with lighting a match and watching the smoke as it blew out. There's an issue there, that sort of thing. But that sort of thing enables you to find certain things at times, which makes quite a big difference. And I think overall with this, what we're looking at through all of the modelling is you can get a quicker, shorter payback from PV and batteries, but the carbon is limited. The carbon implications are limited. You get a much better carbon impact when you start to decarbonise your heating via a heat pump, but that does take a longer payback. However, if you really want to make a big change, you can do that. But also as well, putting a PV and a battery in does help finance the running and the return on investment for putting the heat pump in as well, which is why a lot of the stuff's all been put together. That concludes from my part. I hope that was interesting. I find it fascinating, but sometimes I can get a bit overexcited with some of this. So hopefully there's some good learnings for there, and that was a useful presentation.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you, Duncan. I really appreciate that. Some really interesting points, weighing up the cost savings versus carbon savings and the implications of the different technology. Really, really useful. There have been some good questions coming through. I will invite people to continue putting their questions into the chat, and we will come on to the Q&A session shortly. Just before we do that, a couple of things I wanted to share with you while we've still got you all. So actually, Green Open Homes, which I mentioned in the introduction, and I said I would come back to, it's a really fantastic opportunity, especially in light of what we've been talking to today. It's your chance to go out and see some of this technology in action, as well as other things, as well as a lot of insulation. But there are going to be, well, over 50 homeowners are opening their doors across Shropshire, Telford, and Herefordshire to share their own retrofit experiences and their results with you. It's going to be across 2 weekends this month, the 19th, 20th, and 26th and 27th of October. You can find all of the homes listed on greenopenhomes.net, but there are a few that I wanted to highlight because of today. So actually there are 2 properties that I'm fully aware of that have air-to-air heating, because obviously it's not as widespread. So yeah, there's the cabin in Bishop's Castle in Shropshire and a home in Sutton Farm, Shrewsbury. They both use air-to-air heating. So you could go and have a look at them, see how quiet they are and effective, and ask how the homeowners are getting on with them. There are older homes that are heated with air source heat pumps. We've got Meadowside in Lugwardine, which is just outside of Hereford. That's a pre-1900 listed black and white timber frame home, and that's got both solar and air source heat pump. So you can go check that out. There's Clarksfield in Winton, which is about 10 miles southwest of Leominster. That's a 19th century cottage, and that's got ground source heat pump, solar PV, battery, iBoost, uses 2-rate electricity tariffs. Dave and Vanessa are, Dave in particular, well up on his data as well. So he would gladly talk you through his experiences. And we've got Sunnycroft, which is a National Trust property. They are opening in Wellington, which is near Telford. And they do amazingly do their heating through heat pumps. And then lastly, we've got Beaufort in Telford. Now, Mike uses his solar to actually make money. He has the largest solar array in Shropshire, which he loves being able to have that claim to fame, and he has been in the paper because of it as well. And he doesn't only run his whole house and 2 cars on the green electricity, he also makes money overall out of his solar array and his setup. So again, another one you might be interested in going to see. Right, so I promise we'll be on to the Q&A in just a second, but now we've got Pete from March's Energy Agency. And he is just going to tell us a little bit about a project that he's got going on in Derbyshire. So Pete, over to you, and shout at me when you want me to move on.
Thanks very much. Yeah, I won't take too long. I've got two or three slides just to show you very quickly. So this really applies to those in Derbyshire that are on the meeting today. So yeah, I'm Pete Burgess-Allen. I work for March's Energy Agency, and we've been working in Derbyshire the last year or so to offer some funding that we've had to offer home energy surveys. So Duncan referenced the needs occasionally where you may be unsure about what improvements you might need to do to your home. This project is really helping people to get a home report that will help them to make those decisions. So this is a retrofit survey that we can provide for free to homeowners in Derbyshire. If you could just switch the slide over, that'd be great. We're calling it the Heat Hub program, Home Energy Advice Team, and our focus is really it's homeowners. So if you own your home and you're perhaps in a more difficult to treat property, and that includes off gas, so you're perhaps reliant on a more expensive electricity or oil system, or you're in a conservation area, or you've just simply got quite a poor energy rating on your home, then if you're in any one of those three categories, you would be eligible, in our view, to a free retrofit survey. So we've got a bit of funding through till March of next year. We've got, I'd say, tens of these surveys to offer. So it's not hundreds, but there's plenty to go with there. So please, if you find this of interest, if you think you might find this valuable, can I suggest you go to our portal, and the next slide will direct you to that, I think. That's just the home energy plan that you get after this technical survey will be a sort of personalized summary of the assessment for you, taking into account things that you might be things that you're keen to do next. What are your ambitions? What's coming up in the future. So just talking to you about your particular situation and making it an understandable summary of the technical survey. And so if you do want to sign up to one of those, I think the next slide, if you go to that website, which is a bit of a mouthful, you can use that QR code and it should take you there. But it's the Home Energy Advice Team Hub.uk. And if you go to that site, you should be able to find an application form for surveys. And that will come straight through to us, and we can get in touch, put you in touch with our surveyor, and away you go. So hopefully it will help you to sort of overcome some of those worries or concerns and understand what's the best options to do. And that's pretty much it. So yeah, thanks very much for the chance to just present that to you, and I'll leave that with you.
Lovely, thanks, Pete. When I send a follow-up email after this, I will send those links as well, so that it makes it a bit easier for everyone. Great, right. Questions. Hopefully you put some more in the chat. So over to Tony, who is going to pick up this section with Duncan. You are on mute. Oh, no.
I'm not on mute. I was replying to someone's message directly rather than talking about it. Hi, everybody. Right, let's race through some of these. We've got some interesting questions as always. I hope you're on your pins there, Duncan. There's an interesting variety here. The time of use tariffs we were talking about, the wonderful cheap electricity that can be acquired in the middle of the night. I suppose as an investment, I'm thinking, how do I know that's going to continue? That makes a lot of sense right now, but how do I know I can get hold of that tariff next year or 2 years' time or 4 years' time? Where are we with that? Do you have any inside industry knowledge?
I suppose, yeah, I think there's a couple of points to make. One, I used to do the gas price forecasting for National Grid many years ago. And it's not a job anyone's ever going to get right. And I think there's a point with this as well. I don't think it's quite difficult to work at what the tariffs are likely to be. But the way the energy industry is working, the way the electricity network is working, National Grid struggle with the amount of renewable energy that's on the system already at the moment. They require a lot of more flexibility than they used to have. Basically, coal-fired power stations have all gone now. A lot of gas is turning off and it's been replaced with a lot of renewables, which is a good thing. But it means there isn't stuff to turn. The renewables vary considerably, and there isn't as much generation you can turn up or down to make up for that, or make up for the changing demand patterns, but largely changing supply patterns. So what they're trying to do a lot of the time is they are trying to buy as much flexibility as they can from various different people. And one of those things is being able to get people to use electricity at the times when it's most required. That's very valuable to the energy industry in total. It means there are literally going to be less power stations, wires and pipes being built. And as a result, there will be variable tariffs around for some time. That's one of the things that I can put my hand on my heart on that bit, because they will be available for people. You get kind of aggregated people that then pull all these sorts of things together and they sell that as a service to National Grid to help them balance the network, basically. So variable tariffs will be around for some time, and I think they will get more complex and there'll be more opportunities in that. The export price guarantee, I don't know. I think that will also still be available for some time, but it's very hard to know whether things like the 15 pence export guarantee you get from Octopus are going to be as good as that at the moment. There is this real unusual oddity at the moment where you can be on, as I am at the moment, which is part of some of the things that are great. I'm on a charge where I can buy electricity at night at 7.5 pence, and then I export solar at 15 pence. So one of the things I've ended up doing, instead of just running my battery off solar to fill it up, I run it off battery, and if it isn't full, I fill it up at night as much as I possibly can, because if that was getting filled up with solar, it would give me a certain amount, the saving. But actually what I'm finding is I'm buying that energy at one price and then selling more, exporting at another. So there's this oddity that's happening, and I think the export guarantee price is likely to change and may not be as favourable, which is a shame. But variable tariffs and the opportunities they provide will become so.
Right.
Continue.
That's very brave of you to crystal ball gaze. Thank you very much for that. Right,
Yeah.
we've got a comment from SAC doubting efficiency figures on heat pumps, saying why not just use direct electric heating? I think you answered that with saying that your air conditioning unit is 400% efficient, whereas direct electric would be 100% efficient.
Exactly. And it is that efficiency. They're a bit less for something that goes into the central heating system, because basically you have to then, the heat in an air conditioning unit, it gets the heat and just fires it somewhere else, whereas that heat then gets fired onto a heat exchanger, which then has to be moved around the radiators, which all takes a little bit of energy. So they're not quite as efficient. We're using 325%. Depending on who you talk to, people are quoting generally between 300 and 400%. I think 325 is probably the right number.
Just to clarify, that's for an air source heat pump with a wet heating system, radiators heating system.
Yes. National Grid use something along those lines. It's either 300 or 325% as their figures. They do a lot of analysis on this, and some of the people that I've spoken to that have got it they generally around about 300 to 350% is what they get as well. So that's where that comes from. Was there another part to that question? I wasn't sure.
Okay. Well, it was using direct electric heating instead. I mean, it's cheap to install, I suppose, but
much cheaper to buy, but a lot more expensive to run. And as we say, the other bit as well in the context, trying to think, is that an average house uses 4 times more gas than electricity generally. So using 4 times more energy for your heating than for electricity, but the electricity is 4 times the price. So you don't really want to be putting heating with electricity unless it's really efficient.
Okay, thank you for that. Similar question. This is just a little question about top-up heating from Kate. She's using oil-filled radiators. So those are the mobile radiators you can move around with oil in them, but they run on electricity. The question was, is that better than gas? What do you recommend for top-up heating?
Well, I recommend going the other way and putting an air conditioning unit in, as I've probably gone on about a bit too much, but that's a much higher cost. And it all depends on how you use it. I've used top-up heating in this room, which is, it's all blurred out, but you can probably make out there's a lot of glazing in this room, so this room can get quite cold. And I've used various different heating sources in here. I used top-up heating, an oil-filled radiator, for a little while to stop me having the central heating on, and it was vaguely effective. It was okay, but it didn't work anywhere near as good as this. Essentially, again, about 100% efficient compared to that's 400% efficient and a lot more powerful. So it just depends on how much money you're willing to spend, but you can get simple as that. It's not. It's more expensive financially to run an oil-fired radiator, to get heat from an oil-fired radiator compared to gas, 4 times the price. But if your alternative is central heating compared to top-up radiators, it all depends. If you're in a small room of a relatively large house, top-up heating is probably a better option.
Yeah.
Kind of good.
Yes, I should underline the point I think Kate is making, which is if, like, as you were making, if you have a gas central heating system and you can make a dent in how much gas you're using by using some form of electric heating instead, then that's good in terms of carbon saving. Right. A very good point that we should mention is the word insulation. You were talking about air tightness being important and filling in those drafts and making those improvements.
It might not have been as clear as it could have been if the question's getting asked. This wasn't focusing on insulation. That's a huge whole other area to talk about. This was just talking about low carbon technologies.
Yeah,
it's always good to insulate and reduce your demand. But I think it's just a little bit outside the remit for this. So
yes,
tightness is one thing that we would highly recommend. It's something you can do yourself with effort and time. It doesn't cost too much money.
Yeah, indeed. And of course, if you live in the Derbyshire area and you get in touch with Pete, you will get a home energy report, which will no doubt give you chapter and verse on insulation and air tightness. Right, a more.
Sorry, very
Sorry,
quickly.
Jem.
We are big. We are in huge support insulating properties. And we have done numerous webinars on the topic of how to do it in older properties, how to do it in newer properties, how to insulate your roofs thoroughly, your more difficult to insulate areas. So yeah, you'll have a link in when I email you with all of our previous webinars, and you'll find plenty of information on there. So yes, please don't think we're anti-insulation, because that is far from the truth.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jem. Right, just to get straight back to Duncan's favourite topic. Okay, let's see if you can do some sizing off the top of your head. We have 15 PV panels, says Adam, and an air source heat pump, and we're shortly getting an EV. Very jealous, Adam. That sounds great. What size battery should we be getting, and how much will it cost us? And can you install it next week?
So something fairly large, because you've got electrified heating, you've got quite a large of solar generation. I'm assuming that's a 6 kilowatt system, and an EV. So something fairly large is good. I immediately went, oh, you want 10 kilowatts? Had a 10 kilowatt hour battery. Had a little look. I've actually just run a bit of modelling because I've done this so many times for this presentation. I was kind of quick on it. Yeah, it looks like a 10 I would start looking at something like a 10 kilowatt hour battery, which from the cost that we have, you'd expect to pay around about £4,000. But you've got to check out what the VAT is on that as well. So that's what I would recommend doing, either 10 kilowatt hours or possibly even slightly larger. And I've just quickly run that through some numbers as well. And the 10 kilowatt hours is a much better return than a 5 kilowatt, even though you spend more money.
Okay, thank you. We should throw in the question there, I think, is it worth, am I allowed to ask this? Is it worth having a battery where you don't have solar PV and you're simply using it to take advantage of the time of use tariffs overnight? Is that something that you countenance?
I looked at that this morning because Gemma has actually asked this question as well. So the answer is yes. So yeah, so if you got a variable tariff, it worked out about looking at a 5 kilowatt hour battery, saying it's £2,000. Still not too sure about the VAT. it worked out around about £250 saving, which pays for itself in about 8 years. If you're not paying back on the battery, just check that bit. So yeah, it does actually look quite worthwhile. That's based upon Octopus Go tariff, which is 5 hours of cheap electricity at night.
Nice.
6
And
hours.
sorry, would you need an EV to qualify for that tariff? Do you know?
Yes, I think you would.
Right,
I
okay.
think you would. So that might make that more difficult. I mean, they have. This is the bit. There are so many tariffs coming out, and Octopus is one of the people that people quote about this. Most people go down the route once they get an electric vehicle, they go to Octopus. We did exactly that about when we got a second-hand electric vehicle about 6 months ago. And yeah, but there are many tariffs available. So they have their agile tariffs as well, which you have to be more active. It's not the tariff changes every day, and you get to see what the price is going to be for half an hour, every half hour the next day. So that could be something to be good, but you do need quite engaged with your electricity demand. The way that I find it fairly easy to do with this is that, and some of the it is I program something. I try to do that forever, or for however, and I'll look at it again 6 months later if it needs changing, and that's where it worked quite well. But you need a standard tariff to do that, so to get the most use. So I'm not, yeah.
Okay, this is the tricky bit where I'm asking questions and more questions are coming in. I'm going to do my best. Who is straightforward one here? Who is the manufacturer of your air-to-air system?
I've got 2 Samsung units.
Right.
There you go. My understanding is that they're pretty decent. They're kind of a Volkswagen level of unit. Please, other units are also available.
Indeed. Okay. This is more of a planning question. I don't know if you can have a stab at this. Is it difficult installing solar PV in conservation areas? Many of us come up against this. I'll just throw out there as a starter. The conservation area I'm in is a Victorian terraced street, so it's a conservation area because of what is called the street scene. So anything that's on the front of the house is pretty much a no-no. There's no permitted development rights, but on the back, so the back-facing roof and also the back garden, if I was putting in a heat pump, effectively you have got permitted development and you can go ahead and do it subject to certain conditions, but it can't be seen from the street, so it doesn't affect the conservation area. So there are ways and means. You got any thoughts, Duncan?
I think you're more experienced with this. The only thing that I would add to this is possibly that you may find that you may have some sort of outbuilding. I know people have installed solar panels on large sheds and stuff like that in the past, so that may help. And the other bit is, well, there may, depending upon where exactly you are, if you're in an area that's quite countrified, you may have a ground mounting option. I don't know what the planning permission will be around about that. I don't know if that's an option. I'll probably just add more questions to you there.
Okay, thank you. Right, back to your meat and drink. Am I right in thinking if you're on the old feed-in tariff system, you can't also get the export price guarantee? That is not correct in my understanding.
I thought it was one or the other. I actually thought that was the case, but the old feed-in tariff system ended up becoming a lot better than the current electricity price, but it sort of kept going up and up, and then eventually it came down. But it was a bit of a lag between that and other prices. There was a point where it was very good, but I think generally that would have been a better price.
As I remember it, the feed-in tariff is split into two, where you get the feed-in tariff simply for generating power, and then you got a second payment which was for your export, which depending on how much you exported, and presumably with that you can, as ever, you can export that to Good Energy or Octopus or whoever you like. So you do get both. I think
you're correct. That was the structure of it. Yes.
Right, here's a more tricky one from Mike. 2 of the slides show relative CO2 savings in relation to both gas and oil. In the first, gas is shown providing a greater saving, 8% compared with 5%, whereas in the second, the saving is much greater compared with oil, which we would expect since oil is much more carbon intensive than gas. Is there an error in the first slide? Could it be you've made an error, Duncan?
I could well have made an error. There was a lot going on, and part of my apologies for this was pulling quite a lot of stuff together. The carbon saving should be more compared to. Yes, I believe that is correct. Those are in the wrong way around. I do apologize. I will adjust that before we send the charts out. Very well spotted.
Well done, Mike.
Well
We'll send you something in the post. Not sure what.
I noticed one other quick question, Tony. I had a quick look at some of the questions, and somebody said that their iBoost was charging at night all the time, which he wasn't too happy with. I can tell you, you can set them to charge over a certain time, and it's quite possible that's been programmed to charge at night, and you just need to reset that. It's a bit of a pain. Please just read the instructions. They're online. It takes a while. It's not as intuitive. It might take you 15 minutes of slight head scratching. So I just noticed that from somebody's.
Okay, thank you very much for picking that up. Comment from Adam, don't think you need an EV to qualify for the Octopus Go tariff.
Correct. Oh, really?
Well, the name kind of suggests that you do need an EV, but obviously have a look at Octopus website and all will be revealed. It's a question I was going to ask actually, because I've been thinking about this myself. We have a pod point charger for our EV. Do you know why Octopus will not accept it for their EV charging tariffs? I've looked at this myself. There are all sorts of different options, and if you don't have the right car and the right EV, it sort of doesn't work. I think there's loads of technology out there, and some is compatible and some isn't.
It's basically what can read Octopus's system. So you plug it in, you switch onto your app, and you tell it, I want to charge between then and then, I want to charge it so much percentage. Either the car needs to be able to speak to Octopus, or the charger needs to be able to speak to Octopus. Preferably both would be good, but that's why some are allowed by Octopus and some aren't.
Right. Going back to the export and the feed-in tariff question, which of course, there is no feed-in tariff now, so you don't qualify if you install solar PV tomorrow. Paul, one of our colleagues at 7Y Energy Agency, is saying you can get measured export and the feed-in tariff at the same time. So thank you, Paul, for that. Guidance on conservation areas changed in January, says Marianne. Planners must take account of climate change and judge which is the most harmful, re heritage and dealing with climate change. A good report done on the barriers to retrofitting conservation area properties. Jem has shared a link in the chat which gives you more information from the Future Ready Homes website about can I have solar panels in a conservation area. There was a question from Jackie as well about batteries. If you weren't self-using as much of the solar panel to maximize the carbon savings, that power would be being used by your neighbors, reducing their carbon profile. So would you agree that the main benefit of a battery is financial rather than related to what she calls carbon morality?
It's a very good challenge. I like that. I did see that very briefly as well, and got me thinking. The main bit with a battery that enables you to do is battery compared with a solar system enables you to use a lot more of your solar while you're generating it, which brings your own, it means that effectively you use less of the grid, and that's why it increases the carbon savings compared to just solar. So that actually does bring your carbon down by a fair amount. But you're right, it could just be going to a neighbor. But what's happening when you look at it on a wider scale is that this is coming back to National Grid's issues with trying to manage the system, is they tend to find that solar is really difficult for them to manage because it goes up and down so quickly. And one great quote was, if you get a front coming across, you can change electricity solar demand supply by such a large amount that equates to about a quarter of demand in like 2 hours, just changing from the supply side. So it can be really difficult to manage. If there's days where it's really sunny, the network can often struggle as a result. So yes, a lot of the time it can be supporting your neighbor. A lot of the time National Grids go, oh god, this is causing us a problem. So it can be better just to have as much in your battery and even out how much you export sometimes.
Right,
That's
okay.
a long-winded answer, but it generally helps your own self-use and means that you take less of the grid, which is always a good thing.
Yeah, okay. Another quick point on the Go tariff from Octopus. Sheen P, your pod point. Paul here is suggesting that if you have intelligent Go rather than the standard Go tariff, it doesn't matter what charger you've got. So that's happy days. That's good news for everyone. And I will have a look at that. I think we're going to wrap up there, really, before any more questions come in. Well done, Duncan. Thank you very much for answering all of those. Because no doubt Jan wants to wrap things up with another plug for Green Open Homes, I should think.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, and I just want to say as well, before we move completely off the topic of solar and batteries in particular, there are other considerations as well. There are considerations around how solar panels are produced, how batteries are produced, the carbon impact, the impact on people that has. We did talk about it in a previous webinar that was very much focused on solar, how to make the most out of solar, how to really maximize self-usage from your own generation. So again, I will share that, but it did explore some of those themes as well. So we can't do everything in every single webinar, but these are things to consider, particularly if, yeah, they're just things to consider. So you might want to have a look at that. Right, so we shall park that now. Green Open Homes, please go. You know what, the homeowners give up their time, and we feel so privileged that they do that, and they share their homes, they share their experiences, they share their time, and they do love doing it. But it's hard work for them as well. It's having people in all day. They're running tours, they're answering your questions, and they do love doing it. But to make it worthwhile, please go and see them. Go and find your local one. Go and have a bit of a tour if you like. We've literally got like 50 all over the place. And in the past, people have really appreciated actually spreading it out over a few days, going to see a few different homes that have done different things, and it can really just help with your own planning and decision making. So yeah, please go and do that. In terms of what we've got coming up next, we do have a couple more webinars up our sleeve, so we're hoping to get back into things again. If you've been with us for the last couple of years, you'll know that we tend to do a push over the autumn, winter, and into the spring, because we know that's when people are indoors a bit more. You're not so keen to be out in the gardens and doing other things. So we are going to be with you, hopefully more regularly, for the next few months. I've been saying this a few times now, but we are doing it. We've got windows and doors webinars coming up. These are so important when talking about air tightness. They are vital. And before you start worrying about insulation, windows and doors are really, really important to make sure that they are performing well and doing what they should be. So we're going to have a webinar on that topic alone. And we're also, this is not 100% confirmed, but potentially on the 28th of November, we're going to be doing one about how to work with contractors. So once you've decided you want to go ahead, the next question is, okay, where do I go? How do I find people? How do I find a good installer, reputable installer? If I'm getting insulation done, how do I know that they know what they're talking about and know what they're doing? And it's a big thing. It's scary. It's a big investment of money, and you want to know that you're getting the right people into your home. So we are hoping to do a webinar that is about how to find those people, how to manage them, how to brief them, how to get cost estimates, the whole process end to end, to just give you a bit of support around that topic, to give you the confidence to get on and do it. So keep an eye out from me. You will get emails about them. And you will also be on our mailing list because you have come along to this webinar. So, but of course you can, if you don't want to receive those, you will always be able to unsubscribe. Which I think is just about everything. Thank you very much, Duncan, for taking us through that. Really, really interesting presentation. Lots to think about there. Much appreciated. And thank you to Tony for managing all of the questions as usual. And thanks to all of you for all of your really good questions. I hope everyone got something from this. And we hope to see you next time.